Welcome back to another Monster Mondays. Today I want to draw and talk about the Owlbear, which isn't like Owlbear, it's not a French person saying Albert. It is a hybrid of an owl and a bear, just like the name suggests. It was introduced in 1975, just like the Beholder that we covered last time. And again, just like the Beholder, it's been in every single edition of D&D since. You can also find it in a few other places, actually. It's in Pathfinder, which is a kind of spin-off game of D&D. It's very, very popular. It was based on Dungeons & Dragons edition 3.5 has kind of spawned its own generation of games ever since. And the place where I see it most frequently is actually not in D&D. I see it a lot in World of Warcraft. I'm a big World of Warcraft fan, where they feature creatures that they call moonkins and are basically owlbears that stand on two legs. Still have like all the heaviness of like a bear-like body, but stand upright, and they are very in tune with kind of nature magic. So obviously you'll get a picture of my impression of what an owlbear looks like as we go through, but they're described and usually depicted as having like the kind of majority body of a bear. I imagine kind of a grizzly. They're usually depicted with quite dark fur, but with some feathers protruding, usually from sort of like the arms and from the back of the neck kind of area. I like to imagine that maybe the feathers get kind of smaller and smaller until little strands and spines essentially become softer and softer fur, maybe in deeper layers. They have claws or talons. I personally like the idea of their kind of gripping talons being up front, and maybe having kind of more like bare paws on the back set of legs, just because owls are so well known to be able to kind of pick up their prey. It seems like an evolutionary advantage if they were to kind of be able to grab things more easily from the front. And they have quite owl-like faces, because most of this body seems to depict quite a bear-like feature, but to kind of balance it out, they have very owl-like faces. And their beaks are usually depicted as having like a few sort of spines here and there, a few jagged ridges that are the equivalent of having kind of bear-like teeth, maybe. Now, the apparent inspiration for the owlbear actually comes from an action figure, a little toy that was made in Hong Kong. I don't actually know what the original toy looked like, but I've seen kind of depictions of the original drawings of an owlbear where it kind of stood upright. It looks a bit kind of like miniature Godzilla-ish, if that makes sense. It has quite a long tail, at least abnormally long for a bear, or perhaps an owl. And this toy is just one of many that Gary Gygax, when he was first sort of coming up with Dungeons & Dragons, would buy and kind of playtest with. At the time, him and Rob Kuntz and some other people who were kind of involved in the making of D&D were playing a precursor game called Chainmail, which I've never played, but the way it's been described to me in the past sort of conjures up images like Warhammer. It's a bit more kind of like a tabletop war game that is a bit more reliant on miniatures. So apparently Gary would go to a nearby dime store and he would pick up toys, and the more interesting ones that he could find, the better, because as he was writing D&D, he would use a lot of inspiration from, you know, myths and legends and folklore, but he also wanted some really interesting and weird animals that were unique to his kind of game. So seeing this toy, immediately thought, that's weird and wonderful, let's put it in the game. I imagine a nickname kind of stuck, that it was an owlbear, and thus it was written into the game. But what the hell are they? Are they natural? Are they not? That's actually kind of up for debate in the D&D community and actually in your setting, depending on your setting. I mean, obviously you can decide how they were made in your world, but they're described in 5th edition as a large monstrosity. So they're not a beast. They're not a natural creature by the sounds of it. And in 3rd edition D&D, they were described as a magical beast. So something like a unicorn or something that's not necessarily normal, you know, kind of griffins, all this kind of stuff. Hybrid creatures are usually kind of categorized that way. And it's believed that they were created through magical experiments by some sort of wizard. Now, the reason why I say there's kind of a debate to that is because that's generally believed to be the common consensus, certainly among kind of people who have seen them in the wild in D&D. Some wizard has screwed stuff up just like normal and they've made an owlbear. But particularly old elves and some fey creatures believe that they've been seeing them for hundreds of years and sometimes in the Feywild, so maybe they're a very natural creature. And that ties in again to, in World of Warcraft, they're depicted as very, very natural and naturally attuned creatures. So who knows? We'll go with monstrosity for now, but they could be natural. That said, there's a particular lich called Tesselar who claims to have created them, but he's also known for being a bit of an egomaniac. He's a little bit self-focused, and he claims that he created an awful lot of stuff. You know, if he can attribute some sort of disastrous or wondrous thing to himself, he's almost certainly gonna say that he did that, or definitely not disagree with someone if someone assumes that he did create something. He's from the Greyhawk setting, which is interesting. Now that certainly lends some weight to his claim to have created the Owlbear, because Greyhawk, his setting, now Greyhawk was the first supplement for D&D, and in that first supplement is when the Owlbear was actually introduced. So him being from that setting, this lich being from that setting, and also claiming that they created them, adds a little bit of weight to it. But then he also believes, or at least claims, that he created the Mimic, the Rust Monster, and the Thessal Hydra, which is supposed to be the next big bad guy in Season 2 of Stranger Things. If you're a fan of that, the Thessal Hydra is supposed to be what they're going to be facing. To play devil's advocate, though, and kind of put some weight on the other argument that they are natural creatures and they've been around for a while, that elves might have known them, elves are actually known to try and domesticate them, not necessarily kind of keep them as pets. People have kept them as pets in the past, but usually people kind of take bets on how long it'll take for these ferocious creatures to come and smash them to pieces. But elves, in particular wood elves, are well known for sort of building treetop homes, and they will encourage owlbears to kind of settle into caves in the undergrowth kind of beneath where they build their homes. So they kind of have a natural moat of owlbears ready to slice any wandering hobgoblin or anything like that to ribbons as soon as they come through that area if they're unwanted. So to fight them, they're not super difficult. They're a challenge rating 3 monster, which means that you're going to encounter them fairly early. But we know that they kind of hunt in pairs. They kind of hunt in mating pairs at least, which speaks at least to the bear part of their combined origin. So you're likely to fight a couple of them at once, maybe. So bump that up to a challenge rating 6 and you're fighting 2 of them. Bears are known to be quite social creatures. They'll be solitary for a large portion of their life, but if they find a mate, or if they live in close proximity to one another, they don't usually cause too many problems for each other, depending on the breed, of course. But bears have been known to mentor other bears in hunting and so on and so forth. So the idea of them having mating pairs and going out hunting together seems very likely. We also know that owls, and barn owls in particular, mate for life. So they could have a pair of owlbears that are sort of wandering through the woods. It could be quite a cool story element if your party managed to take one of them down and the other bear became outraged that their loved one, their spouse basically, their life mating partner has been taken down. They could become stronger, perhaps. Their habits are a nice mix between owl and bear as well, and that's reflected in their stat sheet. Obviously, just like an owl, they have dark vision up to 60 feet, which I would have thought maybe could have been extended a little bit further, being that owls are entirely nocturnal. And they have a passive perception of 13, which is quite good, certainly at that level, which I suppose we can attribute to the owl part there, maybe through hearing. Owls have impeccably good hearing. They have one ear is slightly larger and higher than the other, and basically the reason for that is that it allows them to have really good kind of location and depth perception when it comes to sound. Just like our eyes are kind of slightly angled inwards to kind of focus on a point, owls' ears are facing slightly different directions and slightly different sizes to take in as much sound as possible, and their brains are very good at kind of calculating the differences between what each of those ears hear, and they can therefore kind of pinpoint exactly where a sound is coming from. Naturally, owlbears are night-dwelling, just like their owl counterparts. They live in caves, just like their bear cousins. And maybe because of these ears, or perhaps it's a bear's fantastic nose, they always have advantage on wisdom perception checks for things that rely on sight or smell. Now, bears, being related to dogs, have a fantastic sense of smell. Dogs actually have two different parts of their nose that they use when they're kind of breathing in. They have one sort of chamber that allows them to breathe, and then they have another chamber that is basically full of loads and loads of smell receptors. Have you ever heard a dog kind of really quickly sniffing? What they're doing is very quickly opening and closing this chamber and drinking in as much smell as they possibly can, and then closing it to kind of seal it off, to let it ruminate and kind of become a smell soup in that one little area. That's also the reason why dogs have wet noses. I can't attest for a bear having a wet nose because I've never been that close to find out, but if they do, it's the same sort of thing. Having a wet nose helps them pick up and capture more particles in their nose to help even more with smell. Now, in a lot of editions, owlbears had a kind of bear hug mechanic where they would, walk up to something on their hind legs and grab them and kind of crush them, and then they could use their beak to, crack open their heads or something like that. In 5th edition, not so much. They have claws and they have a beak attack. I think because an owl wouldn't really use its beak for kind of like a pecking mechanism, maybe. They're more kind of flesh tearers. And although this isn't said in any of the fluff, we can kind of imagine a few extra things about them having a beak. For example, owls can't really digest bones or really hard parts like shells and so on and so forth. And maybe their digestive tract is a bit like that. So I can kind of imagine that an owlbear would leave pellets like an owl would when they eat something that's very hard that they can't digest. They kind of do their best job to pick every part off of it, and then they regurgitate it and leave it. So maybe an owlbear cave is filled with sort of half-digested bones of their victims here and there, little kind of pellet-sized stomach acid eroded lumps of bone all over the place, absolutely stinking. The other thing, obviously, is that both bears and owls hibernate, so we can almost be certain that there is a safe period for your adventurers to walk through caves and to wander through dark forests at night without encountering a couple of owlbears out hunting together. However, they always say, don't wake a hibernating bear. I'm sure that even worse can be said for a hibernating owlbear. They're supposed to be particularly difficult to tame and very, very ferocious beasts. I, however, am a massive fan of owls. I think they are very, very beautiful creatures, so perhaps their savagery lies in their nature, not in their look. Either way, the owlbear is one of my favourites, and I hope you really enjoyed this video. I definitely enjoyed drawing it, so thank you very much for joining me on another Monster Monday. I'll pop another one up next week, so in the meantime, just look out for another video on Friday, and I'll see you next time. Make sure to leave a comment in the section below or on any of our social media. There are links in the description. If there are any monsters or creatures or even playable races that you'd really like to see me draw and talk about in this way, or if you have any comments or questions, just let me know. Until next time, I'll see you later.